Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody in the sane world anyway. Welcome to AVFM Interviews. I'm Paul Elam, CEO and founder of A Voice for Men. And as usual, we're talking about men's rights issues here tonight. A little bit different twist on it, although more and more these days, it's not such a different twist. Going to be talking to Theryn Meyer, who is a student activist in a university setting with a passion for issues that affect men and boys, and also happens to be trans female. We're going to discuss that some, but that's not going to be the focus on our discussion because this is not tokenism. This is a valued asset out there in the community, the very small but growing community of people that are trying to address these issues. And with that, I would like to welcome you, Theryn, to the interview. So hello there.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's
Um,
lovely to be on.
It's really good to have you here. Well, it's obligatory. I'm going to have to start out by asking why, and I would ask this of anyone. I'm not just asking this because you're trans female, but I think this adds a twist to it. But why on earth immerse yourself in the almost rewardless, constant punishment, making you subject to people's hate and accusation in the world of addressing men's and boys' issues? Why? What drives you to do that?
Well, first off, I've never been one to follow the mainstream or to try and fit in with my opinion. So that was never a bother for me. The constant backlash, certainly not. But what got me into it was actually in the beginning of this year, around January, that was kind of the peak of my involvement with trans activism on campus. And because obviously I got involved in kind of the more social justice-y, far left, progressive-y kind of circles, I got involved. And at first it was fun, and but I guess I didn't realize that fighting for trans issues meant diminishing or negating the issues of a different group. And that group happened to be men. And it really bothered me for a while. And I guess it came to a point where I realized that it's not right, the kind of demeaning and diminishing of men's issues. It's definitely a more complex story than I'm putting in here, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. And basically, I started researching men's rights. You know, I came across Karen Strawn and A Voice for Men articles, and that kind of got me into it and made me kind of swallow the proverbial red pill. And that's when I realized that, you know, I can't even begin to imagine a just society for trans people if we continue to ignore you know, half of the population and their issues. And I'm just one of those people who, when there's something wrong, I have to be one of those people who takes it in my own hands. I can't wait for someone else to do it. And I guess that's why I started my my student activism for men and boys.
Oh, well, great answer. Let me go back, though. I know you said you didn't want to expand on it too much, but I do think it's pretty important, perhaps, to discuss a little bit more about the negativity in that sort of far left social justice community that drives. Now, I'm sure that part of this is sort of a perhaps from the cultural Marxist camp of seeing the oppressed class versus the oppressors, and men being cast into the role as natural oppressors, when the reality of their lives on average is anything but how they're portrayed by social justice warriors. What do you think is driving them? Do they need an identified enemy, somebody to point at, or do you think it's something more deep-seated than that?
That's a very complex answer to give to a very complex question, but I agree. The kind of cultural, the Marxism really stood out to me. The whole idea of class conflict, the class conflict theory of Karl Marx, kind of being directly implemented into gender relations, and men being kind of the upper class, and therefore kind of feeling bad or feeling like sorrow or trying to fight for the interest of the upper class seems almost, it seems unthinkable in the worldview of these people. And there's also this idea of having a right as an oppressed, as the oppressed proletariat, sorry, I accidentally muted my mic. There's almost this idea that the oppressed proletariat has a right to hate on the upper class or the bourgeoisie. And that's exactly what I saw. I saw people feeling a sense of entitlement to hate on men and diminish their issues because they're privileged. So their argument, their reasoning was that it makes no difference, and it's almost their kind of privilege as the oppressed class, whether they be women or trans people or people of color or whatever oppressed class these far left people could think of, they had some right to hate on the male population. And it never made sense to me, because I guess even though I momentarily, relatively speaking, bought into the whole feminist narrative of the patriarchy and all that stuff, I never saw men's issues as secondary. It always mattered to me, and I think it's because I grew up with brothers, and I had a father, and they all really mattered to me just as much as my mother. So yeah, I guess that's my answer to that.
How do people handle it? You mentioned that as a trans person, and of course you can talk about anybody, gay, any ethnic minority in the same way, that they are seen by the social justice camp as part of the oppressed class. Yet you're an individual that, at least in their worldview, is speaking up on behalf of the oppressors. As an oppressed person, that must fry their noodles a little bit when they have to deal with a supposedly oppressed person speaking up on, is this what they're going to call internalized misogyny and internalized sort of Stockholm syndrome type of thing? Or how deep do they try to cut at you about your motives for being an MRA?
Well, yes, it is definitely the case of like them not knowing how to handle a trans woman speaking on behalf of the interests of men. So often I really exploit that, in the sense of, well, seeing as I'm a trans woman and seeing as I have that privilege to get away with saying things that men would never be able to get away with, I really use that to my advantage, and I use it to further men's issues and further the awareness of men's issues and to further men's rights. The worst things that feminists have done are usually they tell me that, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be a woman. That's quite often what I get. And they wouldn't say that to a trans woman who kind of touts their opinions and touts intersectional feminism. But as soon as it's an MRA trans woman, it's you're a man and you can't do anything about it or whatever.
That it's interesting that you bring that up, because I'm obligated to say too that just like not too long ago I interviewed Blair White and the subject came up, that there are elements in the MRA community too that come out with the same line that ridiculous, you're chromosomally male, so that's the end of the discussion. There's no way I'm ever going to see you or address you or regard you as female. End of story. Have you experienced that in the MRA community as well as the feminist community?
I guess I wouldn't say I've experienced that on the campus feminist community, but I've definitely experienced it by trans exclusionary radical feminists online. And then, yes, I've experienced it in the men's rights community. However, I'm of the opinion that, you know, if you refuse to see me as a woman, or if you have a different definition or a different understanding of what constitutes a woman, and I don't fall into that, that's fine. All I can do is provide the best argument that I can for why it is in your best interest as a rational agent to take on my understanding of what a woman is, and as the better understanding, not simply as my understanding because I tell you to, but because it is the superior understanding of what makes a woman. So it's just about making the case, making a rational case. And I've actually found myself convincing MRAs, anti-feminists, conservatives, to rethink their understandings, and I've actually changed people's minds on the issues of trans people. And I even venture to say that I've changed a lot more minds through like rational and peaceful discourse than I would have if I took the progressive standpoint of like, if you don't think the way I do, if you don't understand womanhood or manhood or trans people the way I do, you're an immoral human being. I think if I took that approach, I wouldn't have swayed as many people as I did.
Well, another very good answer. You know, I think probably for most of us who aren't, and I don't consider myself particularly knowledgeable about trans people at all. As a matter of fact, I can look back 5 years and find elements in my own history that I'm in conflict with now, having learned some things and talking to trans people, knowing that I was operating on stereotypes too. And I got to add to that, I think it is a rational decision. I don't want to really, I mean, maybe at some point, I'm still waiting for somebody who disagrees with me to answer the challenge and come on and talk about this. And I would like to talk with anybody, whether they're from the straight white male community, trans community, whatever. It doesn't, if you think that it is illogical to address a trans female as a female and to regard a trans male as a male, then I would very much like to have that discussion, because I think there is a great deal of logic that has to be thrown aside in order to try to make the argument that it's even important to insist on what somebody else is to begin with. But I won't get into all that right now. I want to continue to stay focused on the activism. So maybe you can share with us personally, what are some of the issues that you feel the most passionate about that are affecting men and boys now?
I guess just because I have a little brother of 12, I think the anti-male bias in the educational system, especially, you know, in North America, is a big problem. And that's for the simple reason, not because it's necessarily, you know, as incredibly pressing as like male suicide, but seeing as I have a little brother, it means a lot to me. And I hate the idea of the sweetest little kid being told that he's an oppressor, and that it's his job as a man to stand up for women's issues and just shove his issues to the side.
And that is what's happening now on college campuses, is it not? That our young men are going in and they're being told, in order to conform and to fit in your average college campus, that they must acknowledge that their issues are inconsequential, and that the way they fit in and gain approval is to stand up for what feminists tell them to stand up for.
Absolutely. And I guess that's why it's the biggest problem for me, because I don't want to see that happen to my little brother. Other than that, obviously the typical issues of male suicide, and just the lack of resources, and the feminine bias in the field of psychology, and how that just leaves men completely at a loss of options. And I guess another important thing for me, people often don't talk about trans issues in this frame, but I often see trans issues as a men's issue, especially trans women, because, you know, when I'm perceived as female, I get treated like a queen. Honestly, I really do. I really get treated very well in general. It's when I don't pass and when I'm perceived as a male, I'm seen as a broken male, a messed up male, or a man who is worthless because he can't provide anything substantial to society because he's not fulfilling the masculine role. That's when I experienced most of the typical trans issues, and I think that's when most trans women experience when they experience transphobia. It's not trans misogyny, it's misandry, it's the hatred of men, because those people, those men or women who, you know, call the cops when she's in the washroom, the woman who calls the cops in the washroom, they see that trans woman as a man and as a perverted man, not as a woman, or the man who beats up the trans woman in the alleyway. It's not because he would never have done that if he saw that trans woman as a woman. He sees that trans woman as a messed up man, an effed up man. And I think that trans women often face the brunt of true misandry in our society. And it's really, in my opinion, it's the disallowance of men, or what is perceived to be men, to be fully realized human beings. Because when you look at the degree to which we allow women to express masculine traits and feminine traits, in comparison with how we allow men to only really express masculine traits, it ends up, you know, allowing someone to express both masculine and feminine traits is allowing them to be a fully realized human being. Allowing someone to only express masculine traits is to tell them, you better fulfill this role or you're worthless to society and you're not allowed to be a fully realized human being. And that's what I see.
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up, because, you know, again, going back to that same conversation, when we talk about some people that have what I would consider anyway a narrow point of view about this, if you talk to many red pill advocates, MRAs, people who are really trying to break the demands of gender and are saying, you basically saying to society, you will not define me as a man. You will not have, I won't meet your expectations. If you send me a shit test, I will fail it. If you try to tell me to man up, I will tell you to F off. And that fits in perfectly with what you're describing here. And it makes me wonder, honestly, and somewhat embarrassingly, why I missed it for so long as I did, of not getting the connection that is quite exactly what you said. It's misandry in action. When a person is assaulted simply for being trans, it is because they are seen as a worthless male. And it's a reason that I think that gay men were persecuted in this culture for so long, is because they weren't of service to women. They weren't of service the way that men were expected to be of service. And it's why I think that these conversations are increasingly valuable in helping everybody understand what we're all facing together. Anyway, so thank you for that explanation.
Absolutely.
So let's look at life a little bit outside of college, in society, and this probably goes to the same argument. But outside of the university, what do you see as some of men's more significant problems that they have to deal with, and the obstacles perhaps that are there to deal with them?
I guess one of the biggest issues that concern me, or that I'm concerned with, is this domestic violence, really. I was just reading the statistics of, intimate partner violence in British Columbia. and it's almost gender parity, you know, it's almost 50-50, and there are zero resources for men in terms of intimate, like domestic violence shelters in Canada. So I see that as a really big problem, because I think it's an absolutely pervasive issue. And also I also, what I see as a big men's issue is men in third world countries. This idea that men's issue is somehow some luxurious first world problem that we can finally have time to solve is absolutely nonsense. Men face subjugation and violence and prejudice in third world countries such as my home country, South Africa. An environment like that is a breeding ground for violence, for the to articulate and accentuate the violence of every single person in that culture. It's really intense, and men and women are violent in South Africa, for example, and it's still the case that like as young boys, boys are more likely to experience abuse from parents, and so that cycle continues. And I think the idea of domestic violence against men at the hands of women is, at least in my home country, not even considered, because there are just too many other problems that need to be resolved first. So I see the idea of the men's issues in third world countries is kind of important to me as well.
Yeah, in Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power, he brought out one of the things, did a brief photo essay in that book of children in Afghanistan, and pictures of even living in abject poverty and filth, but still pictures of little girls with dolls and little boys with guns, and I mean real guns, because they were sent out onto the battlefield and often sent in waves to die in mass against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war. Or not, well, yes, excuse me, I was mistaken, not Afghanistan, it was in Iran. And we often have this notion of women in burqas being beaten on the street, and the Middle Eastern culture being so patriarchal. And again, this sort of blindness we have to the actual existence of the average man in the Middle East is actually pretty phenomenal. It's huge, the amount of denial there, that we would assume that the average guy in Iran has it so privileged, when they in fact do not. Many of them are lucky to be alive at this point. So again, is this misandry? I mean, are we dealing with this? Is this the global problem, that if we're talking about domestic violence in BC or South Africa, or little boys fighting in wars, or what's happening on college campuses in the United States, does this go down to an innate hatred of men in some way?
I think it's an innate position that we've ascribed to men, and that's the position of disposability. And hateful sounds almost like a proactive emotion. I think it's often just assumed. It's often just that is the role of men, to be disposable. During the whole Bring Back Our Girls campaign about girls being kidnapped because supposedly they weren't allowed to receive education, at the very same time, the boys were being murdered, and some of them were even burned alive in their hostels, if I remember correctly, in their boarding dormitories. And that's just, so it really epitomizes the idea that men ought to be disposable. And I don't know if that means we think that they should be disposable because we hate them, or just we think they should be disposable because that's what evolutionary psychology kind of destined for them. That's an interesting topic. I don't know if I can answer that question very well.
Well, yeah, and I think it is. It's an ongoing discussion. I mean, and I've certainly had very bright, educated people tell me that their opinion is that you're fighting a battle that cannot be won, that human beings innately must see men as disposable. Um, I tend to not believe that. I think that there was a time when the idea of a world without slavery uh, seemed unthinkable to many people. So I'm not buying it yet. I'm not buying that human beings can't rise above instinct or ignorance and change the nature of things. But I have to admit that it's a big ask to ask people to set aside their instinctive protection of women and their instinctive tendency to make men disposable, and to not have that translate into things like the uh, I, I tend to think the word transphobic is way overused, but to turn that into ignorant indifference or aggressive ignorance about subjects that they would otherwise learn about. Um, Let me move on and ask you something else here. There is a new proliferation, if I can speak, of people that are starting to come out. And I'm not going to get into personalities here, but there is a lot of very popular bloggers, writers, videographers right now. There has been explosion of anti-feminist sentiment, and it gives one hope in some ways. On the other hand, some of these people that are rising to primacy in anti-feminist sentiment at least appear to me to not really understand the issues that well, and to not understand men's issues so much as understanding anti-feminism. And I'm just wondering if you observe anything like, and again, we don't want to get into names here. The point is not to attack or offend anybody, but to take a global look at where this movement is going, and to keep an eye on parts that may not be in our interest.
Um, that's an interesting question. Um, I see a lot more anti-feminists than I see men's rights activists. Definitely, and I think it's. I think people are just getting sick of feminism without realizing why they should be sick of feminism, which I think is because men get effed over. um, so yeah, I can agree that there are people out there who would describe themselves as anti-feminist or whatever, and maybe don't quite understand the complete breadth of how feminism affects men, or how feminism has affected men negatively. At the same time, I guess I'm just hesitant to try and enforce labels onto people, because I know how that can be. And I guess the whole idea of just self-identify, and I'll run with that. So yeah, I can only continue to speak on men's issues and try and persuade people that it's in their best interest to become a supporter and to become a men's rights advocate, without, I guess, vilifying anyone who chooses not to take on the label. But yes, I've noticed that there are definitely a lot more anti-feminists than egalitarians, and I mean MRAs, and I guess a lot of those anti-feminists seem quite angry, which I don't have a problem with, but I find that anger really translates into something that I can process as valuable insight into men's issues. But maybe I guess there's value in just being angry and just letting it out as well.
Oh yeah, I'd probably say so. Feminists have been telling us, and by us I mean men, for uh, decades now to express our feelings. And the moment that we say, okay, here's how I feel, they're like, shut up. So that's a bit of a dilemma to be in. Of course, I think it helps a whole lot if you quit caring what feminists think about your feelings, um, because that's the important part of emotions anyway, is that you're able to own them and that other people don't get to shame you out of them. So
Yes,
you're, go
sorry,
ahead.
Paul.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add to that. Like that's often what I get from feminists. Like when people like feminists in my class in university heard that I was an MRA and that I ran a student club for men's issues, they asked me like, "You're not one of those angry MRAs, right?" And I was like, "So what? So what if I'm angry?" Like it's like the assumption there is that there's nothing to be angry about. Therefore, if you're angry, you're obviously angry because of privilege that you're losing or something. There's the implicit assumption that uh, there's no reason to be angry and being angry is unjustified. Therefore, it's just dangerous. Like if your anger is unjustified, then your anger is dangerous. And that's BS, obviously.
Yes, good point. What do you make of, I mean, because what you're describing there that you've experienced on campus is actually predominantly what we see in the mainstream media. They have been hounding me for years now with being a raving misogynistic lunatic that hates gays, hates blacks, hates everybody, except, of course, straight white men. Um, and you take it with a grain of salt after a while, but they would seem to have succeeded in painting the narrative that no matter what, they can have Theryn Myers right in front of them. They can have Obsidian. They can have other people of very diverse backgrounds standing in front of them. Karen Strachan. I mean, you could go down the list, and it's as diverse as a group gets. Yet the media continues to paint the picture of angry white men and tying things like Elliot Rodger to the men's movement, which is a particularly slimy piece of journalism by the Daily Cost. Do you have any ideas on changing that? I mean, you're a young activist. What would you do to convince the people in the media that there's probably no future in this?
I guess I agree that that is what they paint. They use the whole angry MRA stereotype to invalidate what we do, without rarely highlighting the true issues that we highlight. And it's not, the fear is not angry white men. They just use angry white men as the front. But it's really just afraid that their ideology would crumble. That's what they're terrified of. The best way I think that we can solve or change the media is through a grassroots movement by changing the mind of the consumer, the media consumer. I feel like in a capitalist society, it's in the best interest for media outlets to provide what the consumer would like. So if we do a from the ground up kind of movement, and we just continue to grow that, and we continue to inspire the average person and change the mind of the average person, and really get a grassroots movement going, which is, the MRM is a grassroots movement, and that's why I love it so much. It really starts from the ground up.
There was certainly no government grants in it at this point.
No, not at all. And I hope, I mean, obviously there's a lot of like collusion and corruption in the media, but I hope that that would be the best way to go about it. Yes.
And you may be right, because one thing I've observed, and at least I really believe this is going on, I think the general consumer is getting sick of the male bashing. I think if you go into most social media now, that you see the misandry, the open misandry, anyway, is mocked and ridiculed, is put down. I see average people there. I remember a time when if there was a comment challenging a misandric article online, I probably knew the person that made it. And now they're flooding in from everywhere. People are sick of beating up on boys and men. And I think maybe you're right, that there just maybe with some time and some more grassroots effort that advertisers will, and there's the key, will start to get the message that, you know, beating up on men is not a good sales strategy. And once they get that, then the media will be forced to change. There's no doubt about it. So in the time we have left here, Theryn, tell me, where do you see yourself in the future? What do you, I mean, are you thinking 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, 5 minutes ahead about where you want to be and what you want to do?
Well, I do want to continue working on my channel. I
And
would love to
where
just
can people find that, by the way? What's the name of your channel?
just Theryn Meyer. It's just youtube.com/c/Theryn Meyer. Or you can just search Theryn Meyer on YouTube, you'll find it. And I can give you the link to put it in the description as well.
Great.
So yeah, I want to continue working on my YouTube channel. I want to maybe start writing articles in terms of men's rights. Eventually, I want to do, I want to go into law, and I want to specifically do things in men's rights law and things concerning that field and policy research. So I want to influence law through my occupation eventually. That's why I see myself going. Other than that, I just want to grow my online presence, I guess. Yeah, that's pretty much what I would like to do.
Have you considered developing your own website? Do you have one other than the YouTube?
I don't, not yet. Still working on it. So yeah, but the YouTube, it's a good start to get to know like what my positions are and all of those neat things.
It's the very best start. So yes, we will provide a link to your YouTube channel in the low bar here. I'll get that up after the interview's concluded. Now let me ask you, sort of in conclusion, is there anything that I have not asked you about tonight that you would maybe have wanted me to ask, or that something else you would like to talk about?
Not really. I felt like this was a great conversation, and I love talking to you, Paul. It's just very nice talking to you. You're very easy to talk to. So all I can say is thank you for having me on. I can't think of any topics that.
Well, you're welcome. I haven't lived up to my hateful, horrible reputation very well, I'm afraid. I'll have to, maybe we can work on that in another interview in the future, and I promise I'll do better next time. Ladies and gentlemen, Theryn Meyer, a real activist, hopefully headed for law school and hopefully headed for being a part of changes that we desperately need in this culture for our boys and our men. It's been an enlightening conversation. I want to thank you very much for being here, and would like to invite you also, anytime you would like to send an article to A Voice for Men, we will make sure it gets out there, and we will figure out a way to help promote your channel on the site too. Thank you for what you're doing, and want to wish you the best with it.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. It was lovely having this talk.
Wonderful. Okay, guys, I'm going to take a break until after New Year, probably. No more interviews, no more videos between now and the New Year. I want to wish everybody a great holiday. I'm even going to say Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. I know that's very appropriation of me to do that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Happy Kwanzaa, happy whatever you celebrate, Happy New Year. Wishing everybody the best. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.